There have been calls for Pete Buttigieg to visit East Palestine, Ohio, and he's now responded to those and gone in person to East Palestine, of course, the site of the toxic chemicals train derailment and the very serious outcomes that have been caused by that. We'll take a look at a few different things in regard to this, but one of the things we'll get to in a second here is him just kind of calling out, and I would say crushing a lot of the dishonest talking points coming from Trump and Trump's world. But we'll get to that in a little bit. First, him getting asked if he feels it was a mistake not to go earlier. And I think even he probably would admit, I've seen him admit that he should have been there earlier. If for nothing else, just to show people that there was an awareness of the severity of this. But he also explains here the different things that he was weighing that kind of contributed to why it was a delayed in-person visit.
With that, happy to take a few questions.
There's a lot of trauma in this community, a lot of emotion, and as you noted, a lot of politics too. Now that you've seen the wreckage and spoken to the people, was it a mistake not to come here sooner?
You know, what I tried to do was balance two things: my desire to be involved and engaged and on the ground, which is how I am generally wired to act, and my desire to follow the norm of transportation secretaries, allowing NTSB to really lead the initial stages of the public-facing work. I'll do some thinking about whether I got that balance right, but I think the most important thing is, first of all, making sure that the residents here have what they need. With that.
Okay. Come to your own conclusion about that. I think for sure it would have been good to show people that, especially because there were a lot of questions and still are about the honesty coming out of those saying things were safe and there weren't, and just a lot of concerns about the information that the citizens were getting and the public was getting. And so showing up in person, I think, is a good sign to address that and to show that it's being focused on. But we have talked about in past segments, it is not a norm for transportation secretaries to go in person to train derailments, especially when they're non-fatal. But this one being, as I think Pete Buttigieg has realized, a very severe example of a non-fatal, as of now, train derailment, and that's why more attention is being given to it, which is good. So getting to the Trump piece of this, you might remember when he did his big visit and he was asked during this visit about the criticisms that are justified going towards Trump, that it was deregulation under his administration that could have led to this.
What do you make of Biden, or rather Buttigieg's criticism of you pulling back rail regulations? Do you think it would have made a difference?
I had nothing to do with it.
So he says, I had nothing to do with it. We will look at the facts of the situation in a second, but first, here's Pete Buttigieg speaking to this.
Yeah.
You mentioned a national political figure who's decided to get involved. It sounds like you're talking about Trump, and then you said, I need your help. How can he help?
Well, one thing he could do is express support for reversing the deregulation that happened on his watch. I heard him say he had nothing to do with it, even though it was in his administration. So if he had nothing to do with it, and they did it in his administration against his will, maybe he could come out and say that he supports us moving in a different direction. We're not afraid to own our policies when it comes to raising the bar on regulation. And I've got to think that him indicating that this is something that everybody, no matter how much you disagree on politics and presidential campaigns, can get behind. Higher fines, tougher regulations on safety, Congress untying our hands on braking rules, all the other things that go with that, that'd be a nice thing for him to do.
Yes, so it's important to call out the reality that while conservatives are saying this is because Democrats don't care about small town America or whatever we've been hearing from them, it's just not correct. And in a very real sense, and with this individually, it could have been prevented, possibly. We can never know, or we can rarely know with individual instances, but we know derailments would be less likely if the Obama administration's policies were still implemented in regard to these safety regulations. But then, and that's kind of the microcosm, and within that microcosm, you can also talk about criticisms you have for Pete Buttigieg and Biden and different things you wish happened during the response, and all that justified. When we talk about the macrocosm, though, and this is so important, similar to when we talk about mass shootings, and on an individual basis, you say the mass shooter is responsible for what happened. It's their doing, and the responsibility is completely on them. Then we get to what can we do to prevent future instances like this? What is the general conversation we can have to make sure that even with deranged individuals who have horrible ambitions to hurt people, how can we prevent that from happening with policy, with public policy? And that's when you get to a more zoomed out discussion. So with this, the zoomed out discussion is, it is absolutely conservative ideology that tells us, and conservative ideology isn't just in the Republican Party, there are also conservative Democrats that buy into this, but obviously way more Republicans, that tells us deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. The free market should be as free as possible. Any intervention by the government is terrible interference with the free market that can do everything perfect by itself. And when you think that way, when you structure public policy in that way, you get more instances like this. And it's not to say more regulation is always good. You have to understand when is it good, when is it not. But the simplified view that deregulation is always good, we know is 100% not an accurate take to have. And a lot of people really do, if not use that exact language, really do buy into that general idea and push for deregulation every chance that they get. And so we have to call that out, because it is something our government should do, being controlled by the people and thus more accountable to the people, to intervene, to make sure that industries such as the rail industry are regulated properly, not hope companies do the correct safety practices, but force companies to do correct safety practices to make sure that instances like this don't happen. And so for so much of the conservative movement to spend all their time obsessing over when Pete Buttigieg visited, and so much time focusing on Biden being in Kyiv, and he should have been in East Palestine, Ohio on this day, and is dishonest, because not because you can't talk about that, but because you're ignoring the role that the very ideology that same movement pushes for, the role that has played, which is the major role. Not allowing the government to do what it should do, which is intervene in the beautiful free market that they tout so often, to make sure consumers are protected, because companies won't do that by themselves. And it's so necessary we understand that. And to make sure we don't forget Trump's administration's possible role in this, here is a 2017 report on these very regulations being rolled back.
Regulations meant to increase the safety of trains carrying oil are going away. The Trump administration rolling back those Obama-era rules.
And that's causing alarm from lawmakers in both Oregon and Washington. Our Eileen Park joins us now live to explain what's going on here.
Jennifer and Jeff, 2 years ago, the Obama administration said that trains carrying highly explosive liquids must have electronically controlled brakes installed by 2021. But those brakes are expensive, and the U.S. Department of Transportation now says the costs exceed the benefits.
In June of 2016, a Union Pacific train towing a highly volatile type of oil.
Okay, so then you get the point there. Sounds very close to something, if not exactly something, that could have made this not happen. We can't know for sure, but we do know for sure more proper safety practices, more proper regulations would have definitely prevented this if they were properly implemented. And as one more reminder, here's Trump bragging in 2018 about how much he's deregulated.
No president has ever cut so many regulations in their entire term, okay? As we've cut in less than a year. No president.
And it's the same, how to perfectly phrase this, kind of preying on people's misunderstanding of these issues that is done by the GOP and conservative individuals who are leaders, who have a voice, a big public voice, often, It's trying to trick people with an overly simplified message that can sound nice. I'm cutting all these regulations that are getting in the way of our freedom and all these regulations that are making it harder for companies to thrive. And that sounds nice. Okay, yeah, get rid of those regulations. Regulation, that sounds icky. While not diving into the specifics of why those regulations were implemented. When Trump goes against the EPA, nonstop, I still had GOP in my mind, against the EPA, people who think the EPA is going to trick us all into being climate cultists go, hooray, take down the EPA, without diving into what will be caused by a gutting of the EPA. What will be caused when you roll back regulations, environmental, and on people's lives in a very direct, short-term way. And so that is the conversation we should also be having and be spending a lot of time having whenever instances like this happen. Let's get the support and get a proper response to the people of East Palestine and talk about how we'll prevent things like this in the future. And I can tell you, even though this is Republicans' big talking point recently, and they think that they're pushing an effective message here, it is actually those very same individuals that are preventing us from preventing things like this.